And so after meeting Mr. Dopiera, I thought, well, I'm going to start interviewing people and taking more pictures professionally. And so I took off with Steve Rodriguez from National City. We went on a guitar safari across the country in '72. And Bud Eastman said, be sure to visit Les Paul, because he lives in Mahwah, New Jersey, and he, you know, is a great guitar player, and, you know, you guys would be good friends, maybe. And so I took off with Steve, and we drove across the country, and we went to Nashville, and met George Gruen and Ted Taylor and Randy Wood at the shop at GTR, and started photographing beautiful old Martin guitars with pearl inlay and beautiful L5 Gibson guitars and arch tops and so forth. And then we went off to the East Coast and stayed over the Shenandoah Mountains, which was really nice. And then we went up to visit Les Paul, and he was so gracious and so nice. And he was living in the house in Mahwah where they filmed the TV shows back in the 50s. And so we sat down and we talked all about his life playing the guitar and what it was like. And so these interviews are in the first book, and how the electric guitar came about. And basically he told me that when he started playing harmonica and banjo and stuff, he finally got to the guitar, and it was a lot more fun. But he couldn't be heard with his Sears guitar, and so he took a phonograph pickup needle, like a coil, and he'd jab it on the top of his guitar, and he'd plug it into like a little radio, and he'd go to the drive-in theater, and he could play the his electrified guitar and get, you know, lots of tips, you know, because before nobody could hear him, you know, nobody would pay much attention to him. So now with his 1929 contraption he put together, he started playing electric guitar, and he knew that this was the future. And so that's what he did for a while. And meanwhile, George Beecham had left the National Company with Paul Barth, the nephew of the Dopieras, and they had an idea to utilize the phonograph pickup and the telephone with a coil, you know, to use this copper coil with magnets, and, you know, because the string magnetically is disturbing this field, and so it creates an impulse which goes to the amplifier. And so they developed the first commercially produced electric guitar in the world, and Mr. Rickenbacker financed them, and it came out as the Electro in 1931-32. And so this was the beginning of a completely new era in music. The electric guitar is what it is today, a major icon of entertainment and our world. So Les Paul grasped this soon and started playing Gibson electric guitar when they came out in 1935. And Albina Ray, whom I interviewed twice, he was with the King family. He pioneered the electric guitar playing it, and so did Eddie Durham, whose daughter I met on my recent book tour on the East Coast. And so this happened. Alvina was in Chicago with some of the people at Lion Healy trying to get electric guitar going for Gibson. Eventually they worked with a guy who later did Van Electro and so forth. But so Gibson got going with their ES 150 guitar and their EH 100 and 150 steel guitars. And with the acoustic guitar, the 150 with a pickup on it, people would discover that you could only play it so loud. You'd have to stand back from the amplifier, and you'd have to be a certain distance, and you'd have to kind of keep your hands on the strings so it wouldn't feed back, because the guitar was live, and, you know, with an electric amplifier it was creating feedback. But the steel guitars had thicker tops and so forth, almost a solid body guitar, and so that you could get some more volume out of the steel guitars. And so Les got to thinking, well, why don't I take a block of wood, like a 4x4, and put a neck on it, and, you know, maybe I can get a better sound and play without feedback. And so we did that, and it looked terrible because it was just a block of wood and a neck, and nobody paid much attention to him. So he finally, at the Epiphone factory in New York, he took a body and he cut it up and put two wings onto the 4x4 guitar, and had his pickups on it, and a Doc Kaufman Vibrola, who also worked with Rickenbacker. And so he started playing this guitar, which he dubbed the Log, because it had this big block of wood. And then all of a sudden he got audience response because he was playing a real guitar. And it looked like a guitar, and so everybody said, yay, you know. So anyway, he went to Gibson in '41 with this contraption, and Gibson showed him the door, said, no, thank you, I don't really care, you know, because it was ahead of his time. And Les did a lot of thinking when he was young, and he told me that he would take naps every day, and his mother grew vegetables, and you know, he ate really well and stuff, and he started seeing everything around him and how things were, and what the future would hold. He would have brainstorms. And so as it turned out, he had these ideas, and so he started tinkering all the time, and he became an engineer of sorts himself, and a real tinker, I guess you could say. And he wanted to get a better sound. It was all about the tone. He wanted to, you know, create something that was wonderful and electrifying, and he had played with Joe Wolverton for a while, who was a jazz violinist and guitar player, and he learned some of that flashy kind of jazzy style, and he wanted to play jazz too, so he started playing with the Fred Waring Orchestra after him and his trio went to New York to audition for Paul Whiteman, and he told this tall story, yes, I know Paul Whiteman, and we'll go there and we'll get in his band and so forth, and so he went to New York in Paul Whiteman's office, and they went upstairs and waltzed in. Here we are, you know, let's, you know, and Paul Whiteman, just like Gibson, showed him the door. No, thank you. So they came back out, and so they're standing there waiting for the elevator to go downstairs, and Fred Waring was there. And he had an orchestra as well. And so he started talking to him, and then told him what was happening. And Fred Waring said, well, why don't you audition for me? I'll listen to you guys. So as they got in the elevator, they started playing music, and Fred Waring liked him so much, he says, well, let's go see what my orchestra thinks. So they went into the big rehearsal hall with Fred Waring's orchestra, and Les Paul's trio played, and they loved them. And so they were hired, so they got a gig. And so Les started playing with his trio with the Fred Waring Orchestra. And he would play a couple nights a week with acoustic guitar and a couple nights a week with electric guitar. And it finally came down to a vote. They wanted to find out, well, what does the public say about the electric guitar? Because it was a newfangled thing back in 1937. And so they took a vote, and they did these radio shows, and it was a live feed from the East Coast, and then or a live feed for the West Coast, and then a delayed for the East Coast, I think. So anyway, they took a vote, and everybody overwhelmingly chose Les Paul to play the electric guitar. So it made a difference, and so Les stuck with it. And he just kept playing, and eventually he went out to Chicago and played there, and he got married and had Rusty, his first son, and Gene, and then eventually went out to California. And during the war, he played with Meredith Wilson, who did Music Man later, and with the Andrews Sisters, and with Bing Crosby. So he really was a very popular guitar player in the Los Angeles scene. You know, playing electric guitar, he had a lot of verve and a lot of, you know, energy and so forth. And so. Well, he was playing with Bing Crosby. They did It's Been a Long, Long Time, which was a big hit back at the end of the war. And when all the servicemen were coming back from Europe and so forth, you know, everybody would listen to this. It's been a long, long time, so it was a hit. And they would do recording sessions, and Les was unhappy with the sound in the studio. He just didn't get a very good sound, and it just seemed distant to him, and it didn't seem to be recorded well. And so he was telling Bing Crosby as they were driving down Sunset Boulevard, I want to do my own thing. I want to, you know, make a studio. And, or actually, he said he was dissatisfied with what was going on. And Bing said, well, you should do your own studio and do your own thing. He goes, oh, no, I should. Yeah, no. And then by the time they got over by his house, the idea went off like, well, yes, maybe I really should. So he went ahead and he started developing what we call today multiple track recording, or sound on sound. And he discovered that he could record on an acetate the sound of his electric guitar, and then play that acetate and record again on another one. And so he would start doing these multiple tracks with these acetates, and then they went out during. Actually, what happened was he wanted a singer because he knew that he could just go so far just being a guitar player. He wasn't really a singer, although he'd sung hillbilly songs before in his youth. But he needed a singer, and so Gene Autry suggested that Colleen Summers sing with him. So she came over to visit over there, and I think it was on Gordon Street, yeah. And his group was in the garage, and Les was getting the house ready, so he was out mowing the lawn in his dungarees and fatigues and so forth. And Mary, or actually Colleen, walks up and says, "Is this where Les Paul lives?" And Les goes, "Yeah." I goes, "Where's the band?" She goes, "Well, they're inside the garage there. You have to climb in the window." So she went to climb in the window as he rushed in the house and put on his nice clothes. And he went back over into the garage, and so they formally met, and so they started playing music together. And really, it's that team, that magic that happens, or that catalyst, that energy together. And so she had an incredible voice, and she played great guitar. She could really play guitar well, and she's out there in Pasadena. And so, as it turned out, they started playing together a little bit, but they started falling in love at the same time.